We're coming, and we ain't backing down.
We don't need a bunch of cats in here looking in the mirror.
Everybody just do your job! You understand that?
Hey, will you shut up?
I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today.
Guys being dudes.
And they run through our like through a tin horn, man.
All right, shall we kick off here, Alex?
Yeah, let's kick it off. The first question is from Graylin. Boys, how's it going? Well, Richard, I'd say it's going well. We just had a nice Zoom call, you and me. So that was a nice start to my morning. In fact, two Split Zone Duo related Zoom calls, so early in the morning. So my day's off to a wonderful start. How about yours?
I'm doing well. I went to the old golf sim earlier. Tyler Dunn, the great Tyler Dunn, in the chat. Tyler, what free agents are the Jags getting? They sprayed the board yesterday. Please, in the chat, tell me who the Jags are getting on day 2 of free agency.
Fine, Richard. We will start with this. You can twist my arm about it. Just for a second here. By the time this is in the Split Zone Duo subscriber feed, this will have been settled. But I need you to know that if Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback of the Steelers, I think that might be a pause on my relationship with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
No, it's not. No, it won't be.
Clear about why. I want to be clear about why. It's nothing to do with how I feel about his politics or anything like that. Ben Roethlisberger was the Steelers quarterback for my entire childhood. I'll throw out any pretense of being like a good guy or anything with my rooting for the Steelers. It's just that I feel like if you're hiring Aaron Rodgers to be your quarterback in 2025, the sport should be a two-way street between team and fan, and I'm just not sure I can watch that. Like, I watched what that looked like with the New York Jets last year. I'm not going to do it again.
God gives his toughest battles to his bravest soldiers, and also Mike Tomlin. All right, Jesse asks, we are 5 years into players being allowed to wear the number 0. What positions look best and worse wearing the integer? On a related note, where do you stand on the decline of wide receivers wearing numbers in the 80s in college football? As always, questions in the chat. I will answer this one first from Jesse. All right, first and foremost, I am not a big 0 guy. If you're going to be a 0 guy, I think you have to be a bigger player, right? You've got to embody the 0. Like, for instance, on the Jags, Calvin Ridley wore 0 the year he was on the Jags. I didn't like that. I don't like a svelte player wearing 0. You got to be a big body guy for a big wide number is my take on it. But personally, I like wide receivers and DBs wearing like single digits, right? Like the number 1, for instance, like that's a wide receiver number, right? Like Andre Johnson wearing 5 in Miami. Like that's a wide receiver number.
It's a college wide receiver number. Larry Fitzgerald wore that number at Pitt. When you turn professional, you have to grow up a little bit, in my opinion. Like you're 22. You're 23 years old and you're going to go out there wearing a single-digit number to play a wide receiver in the NFL? You're really going to do that?
I think wide receivers in the single digits in the NFL has been a good. They've loosened the number rules in the NFL now. I like it. I dig it. I'm into it.
I don't really like it, but I guess if we're going to allow this kind of thing in this kind of moral rot of society for people to be wearing single-digit receiver and cornerback numbers, then that's fine. But I would just like to see someone take it completely in the other direction. And let's see a wide receiver wear the number 55. Let's see that. You want to really wear a heavy ass number like that and carry it around while you're trying to run past a cornerback and fit in between a corner and a safety. And you can wear a different number. If a guy wears 55, then I'll change my mind about receivers wearing single-digit numbers.
So Belichick is doing the whole no jersey numbers in training camp or in spring practice thing that he used to do in training camp in the NFL. Apparently, the league, huh?
No names, not no jersey numbers.
No jersey numbers.
What?
They're all just wearing light blue pennies out there if you look at North Carolina spring practice footage. So apparently he used to do this in the NFL, he said. And the NFL made him change and give players numbers in training camp. And apparently what he would do over the last few years when he was in the NFL was he would give the rookies the year they drafted Mac Jones, there are pictures of Mac Jones wearing numbers in the 50s in training camp. So my thing is, I don't know if that's going to cut it in college where these guys very much care about their jersey numbers and the swag and all that sort of stuff.
Richard, let's take a question from the live chat here. This is from Tron. Will the Clemson-Florida State settlement with the ACC make it less likely that Memphis or Tulane would consider renewed overtures from the new Pac-12? I like that. Since there may very well be openings in the ACC in 2030. Tron, permission to use your question as kind of a jumping off point to just talk about the settlement, because I don't think we've done it. We've been doing other off-season vibe check episodes, history episodes the last week or two. So I don't think we've talked about the settlement yet. Tron says that's great. Actually, I hope they say that. I don't know if they say it. Richard, first, can you give me your thoughts on the settlement? On the, the nature of a settlement is that nobody quite wins, but sometimes I think one party maybe is a little closer to winning than the other when there's a settlement. And I have a feeling about which side that is for this one. And it's Florida State and Clemson. And also, in theory, North Carolina and Miami.
Yeah, I think that Florida State basically got what it wanted, and Clemson and North Carolina basically got what it wanted, which is more revenue. I think what Florida State could never stomach is that UCF makes more money than them. And I get why. I totally get why. So yeah, they were going to do their saber rattling, and they were going to do all the things that they were going to do, and they were going to take a fairly extreme position, and then you end up somewhere in the middle. Now, I will say this. I give Florida State at least some credit for being out about what they wanted and being open about what they wanted. What I don't abide is North Carolina doing the exact same thing just behind the curtain. Like, if at least Florida State said it with their chest the whole time here, the last few years as they've been playing settlement ball. I think the ACC is the biggest winner here. I think Jim Phillips is probably the biggest winner. Yeah, dude, the league stays together.
Well,
we'll deal with 2030 in 2030. I don't know what the hell college sports is going to look like in 2030. Yeah. I couldn't tell you where Alabama's going to be in 2030. But I think for now, in 2025, yeah, we keep the league together. So for me, I think Jim Phillips and the ACC are the big winners, to be honest with you.
I don't think that's ridiculous. I would have taken it the other way, because previously, I would say the year to which Florida State and Clemson would have kind of had to stick. So remember, the grant of rights was to 2036, is to 2036. You'd assume that it's pretty tough for Clemson and Florida State to leave without taking a really frustrating financial hit until the early to mid 2030s. Maybe you sacrifice a few years of revenue, and maybe by that time you figured out your private equity Hail Mary if you're Florida State. I think where you are correct is that the ACC, as recently as 6 months ago, seemed like it could have fallen apart at basically any point. And so now the fact that it seems pretty well settled for another 5 years is a win for them. But I would put this to you, Richard. Is the ACC's stability here because of this well-executed settlement by Jim Phillips? Or is it because the Big Ten is busy and the SEC is busy and Clemson and Florida State couldn't find a home in one of those two leagues anytime soon?
Oh, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, it's got to be you have to play within the confines of where you're at. You have to play in the sandbox that you're in. And yeah, Florida State and Clemson and North Carolina didn't have an exit. I mean, I have it on pretty decent authority that if the SEC was going to take one of them, it would actually be North Carolina out of this group of schools. So yeah, I think that those Clemson and Florida State specifically didn't really have a place to jump through. And I use Clemson and Florida State obviously because they were the most out and open about their discontent in the ACC and all that sort of stuff. All right, Matthew asks, boys, do you find that the trend of not playing spring games has more to do with coaches not wanting to volunteer opposing game tape or an NIL pay-for-play issue? Alex, this is another thing we haven't really talked about at length. I don't know if we want to call it the death of the spring game, but maybe the sidelining of the spring game. Look, I think that I think it's okay to not play spring games. But I think you have to have something where your football team touches its fans between January and September, especially if your football team is going to look radically different in September than it did in January with portal this, portal that, maybe even a new coach or two or what have you. Look, I have very fond memories of going to spring games as a kid. That was the thing that we would go to. You know, my mom would take me to the spring game, Florida spring game. Cheap. It's a nice day out. I'm sure if people have families in the chat, I'm sure it's a nice day out. It's a relatively cheap day out versus a fall Saturday. Spring games are good. Spring Saturdays are beautiful at a lot of places, even Ohio State, for instance, even Michigan, for instance. It's gorgeous. It's a good visit weekend, all that sort of stuff. I think you need to have something that touches the fans, whether it's autograph day or you play Pro Bowl games, flag football, or whatever it is. Maybe you have a spring sport that maybe I'm making this up, but I thought one school did like a double where they had like spring game and wrestling meet, or was it like spring game and women's basketball? Was it something like that?
I was going to bring a number of schools do this now, and I actually think that's really smart, where you try to use some kind of spring football event to juice attendance for a lacrosse game or something that's happening in the spring, or a basketball game that's happening if you're early enough in spring, and you might want to get more attendance for the women's basketball team. You can do something like that. I think to answer the question about whether or not these are going away because of portal concerns, like your players are going to get seen and get poached, or if it's something else, on that, I'm curious what you think, Richard, like specifically. I'm football coaches are among the most paranoid people in the world. So I don't think that Matt Rule was lying when he said we don't want to put our players out there to get noticed and get offered in the portal. But I'm not sure that that's really the animating reason. I think a more animating reason might be you don't want anyone to get hurt, and guys are going to try a little bit harder, put a little bit more of their bodies on the line in a spring game, even though you obviously can't hit the quarterback. And it's just a thing to put together, and you'd rather not. That's sort of how, and also I think you, Richard, might have an inflated perspective because of where you grew up about like how big a deal a spring game is for most fans in general.
Sure.
Like the Florida spring game is one thing. I went to the Maryland spring games when I was a student. I was covering the team. There's like 200 people there.
Right.
And so it's just like, we'd rather just have a practice, I think, is another thing that I'll probably think.
What I will say quickly before we move on here is I believe Matt Rule more than I believe Steve Sarkisian. Like Sark was like, oh, we've played 30 games in the last 2 years. And come on. But I do believe Matt Rule more than I believe Sark.
The other piece of this that I would mention is that I think spring games or spring mini games or whatever you're doing, they should serve a program-specific purpose in the year that you do them. Like, so if you're not one of the 10 or 12 that's actually going to put a lot of people in the stadium and it's going to be a really fun day for everybody, like, I agree you should do some kind of fan fest or something, no matter who you are. But I think it makes sense in the context of Appalachian State this year is bringing back their spring game. And they're doing it because they got a new coach who's not from there after firing a coach who was from there, who underachieved and who had kind of some of the hearts and minds of the locals, even as he was losing. You got to introduce a new coach. You got to keep people excited after a pretty disappointing couple of years in the Sun Belt. Come out and see us in the spring. Makes a lot of sense. That's if you have that. If you have a way to juice ticket sales for something else, I think it makes a lot of sense. But otherwise, yeah, I'm with you. Do the Fan Fest thing and find a way to make sure that people can touch your football team during the long off season. Richard, another bit of news that we have not tackled yet. Eddie George going to Bowling Green. Question from Brian G. From a marketing standpoint, Bowling Green is selling Eddie George as an upgrade in ambition for the program. Is it delusional or reasonable to expect bowl eligibility? They've got a light max schedule in 2025. And also, with a hire this late, does spring practice become a huge exercise in speed dating on both sides for coaches and players? On that, I would say yes. Seems like it raised the difficulty of a high variance job. I want you to weigh in on Eddie George to Bowling Green. What do you think?
Yeah, the Eddie George thing is really interesting for a lot of different reasons. It gets Eddie George out of an HBCU. I think that Eddie did tremendous work at Tennessee State, but I understand if you are a coach of a certain ambition and you feel like you've maxed out at an HBCU, you feel like getting to the playoffs, which is what they did this year, is about the best you can do. I think they went 9-3, if I recall correctly.
9 wins after winning this was a slow build because they had won, I think, 9 or 10 games in the 3 years before he took over. And by his 4th year, they win 9. They win the conference. He's coach of the year in that Big South OVC hybrid for a sense of the shape of his tenure.
Yeah, they're not in the Tennessee State's not in the MEAC or the SWAC. So I think the Bowling Green thing is interesting though. So okay, it's March, so tough to take over a job in March. Can you bring in your own guys? Can you increase salaries at all to be competitive? Can you, and I'm talking about coaching salaries to build your staff. What does your infrastructure look like? The general questions. I'm not saying that, I don't think that Eddie George was a desperate play by Bowling Green. That's not what I mean when I say what I'm about to say, but your head coach left you on March 1st. Your options are relatively limited for the type of person who's going to take a job at Bowling Green on March 1st. The other thing is we've got some Urban Meyer here. It seems like we got a whole lot of Urban Meyer here. Urban Meyer via his Ohio State connections, one would assume. Yeah. He knows Eddie George quite well. And it seems...
We're not Colorado Stating this. This is fine.
Right. It seems like, they pretty much have said openly that Urban Meyer was very instrumental in getting Eddie in front of Bowling Green's athletic director and sort of getting him in the mix. So, okay, that's good on Urban. It is something that affects hiring diversity in the FBS level. So good on Urban, good shout from Urban Meyer of all people.
Yeah, hey, sometimes you're surprised in life, and sometimes you take input from Urban Meyer on your coaching search, and it's actually not a terrible idea. There's a first time for everything, even in this day and age.
It's also like, what do we talk about when we talk about these MAC schools, right? If it's a deck chairs situation, deck chairs on a tiny Titanic situation, like, be bold. I don't know, try something. You know what I mean?
I would agree, and I think from the win the press conference perspective, this is a winner for Bowling Green. Eddie George is very, very sellable in kind of the way that you're describing, right? Like I think every MAC fan knows the score right now. Like they know the difficulties that conference faces. And it is exciting to be able to have a guy who you can put up there at the podium and who can get people feeling like a certain Ohioan excited way about college football. The press coverage that they've gotten off of this has been really good. Does that provide some marginal MAC recruiting benefit for the first year? Yeah, I think it might. Eddie goes up there and he says the goals as of right now are to win the Battle of I-75. That's Toledo, I believe. Win the MAC and then go play for a national championship. Those 3 things. He's getting coverage calling it a bold and inspired move. Now, does that win football games? No, but how many times do we talk about how hard it is to get MAC fans in the seats, given the way MAC games are scheduled now? I would be pretty surprised if Bowling Green does not see some uptick in attendance, in vibes, though you can't measure that one exactly, in 2025. I think, and you didn't have to pay a buyout for Scott Loeffler to leave. So this does seem really good to me, even though, I don't know that anyone can outrun the limitations of these jobs in 2025. So happy for everybody. I hope it works out well.
The last thing I'll say, Alex, is what Eddie brings, I think, from a marketing sense and a potentially capital sense, I think is interesting. Eddie's tied in to some financial stuff. I don't mean that nefariously. I mean, he's got a financial services firm that he runs, or at least lends his name to. Eddie George also is wildly successful in pretty much everything he does. He was on Broadway. Obviously what he'd done on the football field at Tennessee State. I understand how you're hey, look, everything this guy touches turns to gold. Let's try it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There will be a replica Heisman Trophy. Or do they give you the real Heisman Trophy?
They give the school one and they give the player one.
All right, so there will be a Heisman Trophy sitting in the coach's office at Bowling Green. Not a lot of MAC programs can say that. I think it's exciting.